Muyu doesn't hide what he is. He doesn't need to. Because nobody in this story is actually a person to him. They're pieces, useful for as long as they're useful. So this is the one I've been wanting to do since the second I met him. Not because Muyu is complicated, that's actually the opposite of why I want to talk about him. Here's the question I want to sit with today. What happens when a villain never feels the need to justify himself? Not a man hiding a wound, not a man convinced he's the hero of his own story, just someone who looked at the idea of caring about anyone, decided it wasn't worth his time, and never looked back. We're going through this chronologically, scene by scene, the way it actually happened. I think the order matters here. I think it's the accumulation that gets you there, not any single line. The first time we meet him, he's already playing a part, reasonable, composed, trying on the surface to look like someone who isn't the person behind everything. Except it doesn't really work, and I don't mean the performance is badly written, he's just not trying that hard to sell it. Yangyang already suspects him, he knows she suspects him, and he keeps talking anyway, loose, almost enjoying it, like getting caught isn't even on the list of anything worth worrying about tonight. My first thought was that this had to mean something. Maybe he knows something we don't. Maybe there's a reason he's this confident in front of someone who's already proven she's dangerous. The more I sat with it though, the simpler the answer got. He's not confident because he's certain he'll win. He's careless because getting caught doesn't cost him anything he actually values. Being seen was never the risk in the first place. Whole personality right there in scene 1. Which brings us to the version of him that actually explains everything else, the monologuing. I'll be honest, I usually brace for this. A villain's speech is either boring or trying way too hard to sound profound. This one's actually well written. I still don't buy a word of it. He calls the Sentinels gods, watching from what he calls a lofty perch while humanity marches in circles like ants. Then he adds something else. Fire was stolen from the gods once already, by human hands, and the world forgot how it started. That's not flavor text, that's him writing himself into a lineage. In his head, he's not a villain. He's just the next thief brave enough to take what's already being hoarded. Except, look at what he's actually asking for. He's not trying to tear the throne down, he's trying to sit in it. And here's the part I actually laughed at a little rewatching this. He tells Yangyang almost word by word that he's a man who values efficiency too much to waste even 1 second on anyone unrelated to his purpose. Says it like it's a virtue, like it's supposed to impress her. Keep that line in your back pocket, we're coming back to it. Next scene, we don't even get to see what happens between him and Yangyang directly, the story cuts away. We come back to the protagonist instead, already too late, already looking for her. Muyu's response is, I think, the single line that tells you more about him than anything else in this arc. Yangyang, so that is her name. Sit with that for a second. He spent this entire arc fixated on her, tracking her, planning around her, calling her, in his own words, someone who could have contributed to his grand experiment. And he never once bothered to learn her name. That's not an oversight. That's exactly what evaluating someone as a resource looks like from the inside. You don't need a name to grade how useful something is. Then there's the line to the protagonist. Such a shame, you fancy yourself a hero, but you're too late, far too late. The words alone are almost nothing. It's the delivery doing the damage. Said like the word hero is faintly ridiculous to him, like the whole concept is beneath actually engaging with. And then the line I think is the most interesting one in the entire episode. He calls the Sentinel's creation a toy box, something he gets to play with, which sounds like a contradiction. Calls her a god one breath, mocks her creation the next. I don't think it actually is one though. He's not claiming to be bigger than a god, he's claiming he can quietly outplay whatever she's built without ever needing to be her equal. That's contempt by proximity. I don't have to beat you. I just need to prove I can do better with your own toys than you can watching over them. Okay, this is the scene that actually convinced me more than anything he said out loud. He's kidnapped people, killed them, siphoned what he needed out of them and fed it into the automata to control the Sentinel's own creations. That's the plan, and it's monstrous on its own. But the moment I want to actually sit on is smaller than that. The protagonist gets close and Muyu doesn't fight, doesn't run, doesn't even seem particularly bothered. He just throws the cages down, actual people still inside them. A delay tactic, something to slow the hero down while he finishes what he's doing. No speech about, no, I take no pleasure in this, no lesser evil, greater good, none of the usual villain mad. Remember that line from earlier? A man who values efficiency too much to waste a second on anyone unrelated to his purpose? This is what that actually looks like. Once it's not a philosophy anymore. It's just logistics. And that absence is the tell. Think about how a person operating on a real conviction usually behaves in a moment like this. Even someone who genuinely believes the ends justifies the means tends to feel the need to explain that to themselves, even alone, even when nobody is listening. That compulsion to justify is what a real moral cost sounds like from the inside. He skips it completely, doesn't pause, doesn't flinch. There's no conscience in the room for him to argue with, because there was never one installed to begin with, which is the exact same discovery as the missing name, just with a mask fully off this time. If manipulating Yangyang was entertainment for him, using hostages as logistics is just efficiency, neither one required him to feel anything, because neither one was ever about people to begin with. People were only ever inputs. His last big monologue is where the character actually completes itself. Took me a minute to see why though, because on first watch, it just looked like he was contradicting himself. He says we know nothing of the Sentinels, not their design, not where their knowledge comes from, and in the same breath he calls them creations, which means somewhere in there he already knows exactly what they are. Gods on one side, machines on the other. Which is it? Here's what actually resolves it. Once you track what he grants versus what he refuses, he'll admit the facts without a fight. They're built, they run on code, protection is written into them. He can't argue with that, it's just true. What he refuses every single time is the leap from designed to protect into actually caring. Has a single sentinel ever confirmed it to you? Isn't really a question about the code, it's a question about whether anything underneath the code is real. I don't think that's ignorance on his part, I think it's the one thing he genuinely can't afford to believe. Because if a sentinel can care about humanity without it being about power, without it being leverage, that's not just a fact about sentinels anymore, that's a direct threat to the entire foundation he's built himself on. His whole worldview only works if everyone underneath the surface is exactly like him. So instead of arguing with the evidence, he just reclassifies it. Sacrifice becomes borrowed protection, care becomes something that will inevitably curdle into carnage. He's not describing the sentinels in that line, he's projecting what he'd do with feeling and calling it prophecy. Last scene, and I genuinely don't think I could say this better than Yangyang already did. She tells him almost exactly what we've spent this whole video figuring out, that humans aren't puppets. That from the moment we're born, we find our own voice, that he twists people, marks them, uses them as tools, and because of that, he will never understand what they actually mean. It's basically the thesis of this episode delivered straight to his face instead of concluded by us from the outside. And here's the moment I keep rewatching. He doesn't react, not bored contempt, not anger, not even the flicker of someone being told something they don't want to hear. Nothing at all. And that absence is doing more work than a reaction ever could. A reaction, any reaction, would mean the words landed somewhere. Even fury would mean he'd hurt her. This is something else entirely. It's not that he disagrees with what she's saying, it's that what she's describing doesn't register to him as an argument in the first place, like she's speaking a language his worldview simply doesn't have a slot for. It's genuinely beyond him that he might be wrong to begin with, not because he's decided he's right, because the question never even loads. So here's where I land with Muyu, at least for now. I don't think he's a misunderstood idealist. I don't think there's a wound underneath the performance, waiting to be uncovered in some later update. Every piece of evidence points at something much colder, much simpler than that. Everyone he meets is a resource under evaluation, and that evaluation never stops running, no matter how interesting someone briefly looks to him. And honestly, I think that's refreshing. Every major villain we've had in the story so far has come with real depth. Messed up, sure, but built like an actual person underneath the mess. Muyu gets handed every ingredient you'd expect to create another morally grey villain, a tragic past, a philosophy, even a critique of the Sentinels that isn't completely wrong, and somehow he still comes out emotionally hollow. I don't think that's the writing running out of ideas, I think that's the actual point. He's shallow on purpose, and the story keeps proving it instead of announcing it. I just hope Kuro doesn't flinch later and hand him a redemption arc built on sympathy he never earned. So tell me, did you read him the same way, or is there still something underneath all of this that we haven't seen yet? Do you think a villain like this, with nothing underneath the performance, is actually scarier than one with real ideology? Anyway, that's gonna be all from me for this one. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more story discussions like this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.